In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But what if, by some impossible twist of fate, one of Earth's most unyielding lawmen, Judge Dredd, were thrown into that universe? A man who is the law, cast into a realm where law itself has become a weapon of tyranny and survival. This is not just a meeting of worlds, it's a collision of ideologies. The incorruptible order of Megacity 1 against the brutal order of the Imperium of man. Judge Joseph Dredd, a product of genetic engineering, discipline, and a city on the brink of collapse. For over a century, he's been both executioner and protector, judge and jury, upholding the law amid chaos. His justice is absolute, emotionless, and efficient. In his world, crime is inevitable, but punishment is immediate. In a sense, Dredd represents humanity's desperate attempt to impose logic on madness. Now imagine that same man, transported, perhaps through a warp rift experiment gone wrong, or the meddling of some forgotten Mechanicus artifact, into the 41st Millennium. A time where humanity's empire spans 1,000,000 worlds, yet its citizens live under constant fear. Here, the Emperor is worshipped as a god. Here, heresy is death. And here, the Adeptus Arbites, grim enforcers of imperial law, are the closest equivalent to Dredd's judges. But even they pale before his singular focus. Dredd's arrival would not be grand or cinematic. It would be abrupt. One moment patrolling the radioactive outskirts of Megacity 1, the next awakening beneath an alien sun. His helmet would scan his surroundings, his lawgiver weapon ready. Dust storms of a desolate hive world would whip against his armor as he recalibrates, trying to understand what went wrong. No sign of megacity infrastructure, no comm channels, only static and distant shapes, shanties, settlements, and workers toiling beneath Gothic spires of metal and smoke. He would head there immediately, because that's what he does. Find order, restore control. The locals would see him as some kind of off-world arbite, perhaps a rogue enforcer from another sector. His armor, his weaponry, alien, yet familiar enough to invoke fear. They'd speak of tithes, of quotas, of the Emperor's will. He'd recognize the structure, oppression disguised as faith. Dredd wouldn't flinch. Law's law, he'd say, scanning a group of underhive workers being beaten by planetary enforcers. You're breaking it. Blaster fire would answer him. Seconds later, silence. That's when word would spread. A judge not of the Arbites, but something else. Something pure. Soon, whispers would reach the planetary Arbites precinct. They'd send a patrol. And when they find him, standing over a dozen dead enforcers, giving first aid to a wounded child, something within them would shift. He acts without devotion to the Emperor, without the blessing of a priest, yet his justice is absolute. It's not faith that drives him, it's duty. The Arbites would confront him, demanding his identification, his rank, his sector authority. Dredd would reply, "I am the law." To them, it sounds like blasphemy. To him, it's a statement of fact. Tension would erupt quickly. The Arbites are used to command through fear and reverence for the Emperor. Dredd commands through principle. They see him as an anomaly, perhaps a mutant, perhaps a heretic. He sees them as corrupted lawmen, slaves to bureaucracy and superstition. And yet, beneath all that, there's a shared recognition. These are enforcers. They understand hierarchy, control, and the necessity of justice. It's the definition of justice that differs. Eventually, they'd escort him to the Arbite's commander, a stern veteran. Armored in black carapace, the imperial aquila emblazoned across his chest. The chamber would be filled with incense and candlelight, a shrine as much as a courtroom. The commander would demand Dredd kneel before the Emperor's image. Dredd would remain standing. That silence would stretch like a blade. "You refuse to kneel before the Emperor," the commander would hiss. Dredd would glance at the icon, then back at him. "Never knelt before any man." "Don't plan to start now." To the Arbites, that's open heresy. To Dredd, it's simple integrity. A fight would seem inevitable, but the commander would sense something deeper. This stranger radiates authority, not born of faith, but of conviction. He's the embodiment of law without doctrine, a thing both dangerous and fascinating. Rather than execute him, the commander decides to observe him. Dredd is detained, questioned, scanned. His DNA compared to Imperial records. Nothing matches. His armor resists interrogation. His lawgiver refuses to be analyzed. Machine spirits reject its alien code. Tech priests whisper that he may be a relic from the dark age of technology. Meanwhile, Dredd studies the Imperium. Through barred windows, he watches prisoners being tortured in the name of confession. He sees the Arbites operating under the Ecclesiarchy's shadow, enforcing decrees they barely understand. To him, this isn't law, it's fanaticism. The people obey, not because it's right, but because they're afraid. And that, to Dredd, is the greatest perversion of justice. Eventually, he's brought before an inquisitor, a towering, pale figure in ornate armor, his voice layered with vox distortion. The Inquisition has taken interest in this anomaly. "You claim to be a servant of law," the Inquisitor begins, circling him like a predator. "Whose law? Not the Emperor's, not the Lex Imperialis. What god do you serve?" "I serve justice," Dredd replies. The Inquisitor's smile is cold. "Justice without faith is chaos. Justice without the Emperor is heresy. Then your Emperor's law is broken." That's enough to seal his fate. Execution, perhaps even excommunication, if he were one of their own. But something stops the Inquisitor. There's power in this man's words, a clarity long lost to the Imperium. The Inquisitor decides to test him. Instead of ordering his death, he sends Dredd into a lawless mining world, an outpost riddled with heretics and Xenos smugglers. "Bring order to this place," he commands, "and prove your justice is more than arrogance." Dredd accepts, without hesitation. When his gun and bike are returned, he rides into the dust wastes of the planet. The sky burns with twin suns, the horizon littered with industrial skeletons. He surveys the settlements, where cults operate freely and Arbites' patrols are outnumbered. Here, the Emperor's name holds no weight. Here, Dredd's kind of law might actually work. And so begins the legend whispered through vox channels and bar rooms. The Iron Judge, the man who brings justice without prayer. A myth spreading across the sector. Some say he's a machine. Others say he's a ghost from the Dark Age. But to those who meet him, he's something far simpler. A man who will not compromise. And as Dredd's shadow grows across the Imperium, the question arises, can one man's vision of pure justice survive in a universe built on faith, fear, and fire? The answer would soon test not only Dredd's resolve, but the very foundations of Imperial law itself. The mining world of Vordrast was a wound on the edge of Imperial civilization, bleeding dust, corruption, and despair. 1,000 kilometers of iron pits and smog-choked colonies governed by nobles who hadn't set foot on their own soil in decades. Cults festered beneath the machinery. Smugglers ran contraband through half-functional spaceports. The Arbites had withdrawn years ago, leaving local enforcers to sell justice to the highest bidder. When Judge Dredd arrived, the locals didn't see a savior. They saw a problem. His black armor gleamed against the rust and sand. His voice, cold and precise, echoed like an executioner's verdict. Within an hour, he had arrested 2 gang leaders, dismantled a smuggler ring, and left 4 armed guards crippled. His presence cut through the rot like a scalpel. At first, they laughed. Then they whispered. Then they feared. He walked through the main settlement, Cindervale, like a storm in slow motion. A crowd parted before him as he dragged a gang boss through the streets, announcing his crimes aloud. Possession of warp-tainted contraband. 5 counts of murder. Sentence: death. The onlookers expected ceremony, some formal inquisition. Instead, Dredd's lawgiver barked once, and the sentence was carried out. Justice served, he muttered, holstering his weapon. Word traveled fast. The locals began calling him the Steel Arbiter, though no one knew what world or order he came from. The miners, beaten, broken people, began to cooperate. For the first time in years, they saw law as something real, not just a whip for the powerful. Within weeks, the death toll among criminal leaders skyrocketed. Dredd's efficiency was terrifying. He moved like a machine, sleeping little, never removing his helmet, never asking for thanks. The Inquisitor, who had sent him, Lord Kareth, watched through surveillance servitors, intrigued. He doesn't preach, Kareth mused to his acolytes. He simply acts. Fascinating. One of his attendants frowned. Without the Emperor's light, his justice is hollow. It's only discipline, without divinity. Kareth leaned forward. And yet, look at the order he brings, the fear he inspires. Perhaps faith is not the only way to shape men. Meanwhile, Dredd began cataloguing Imperial lore from recovered data slates. What he found appalled him. Entire volumes dedicated to heresy protocols, purity testing, religious obedience. Nothing about rehabilitation, fairness, or rational governance. "You call this justice?" he muttered under his breath. "This is control by fear." Still, he enforced it where it aligned with his code. Theft, murder, exploitation, those remained crimes. But when the ecclesiarchy demanded he arrest workers for failing to attend prayer, he refused. "Attendance isn't law," he said flatly. "That's coercion." The priest sputtered. "You dare defy the word of the Emperor?" "I enforce law," Dredd replied, "not superstition." By Imperial standards, that was heresy. But the miners saw something divine in his defiance. A man who stood against both criminals and priests, who judged by reason rather than blind faith. To them, that was true justice. The cults, however, saw opportunity. Deep within the underhives, a Slaaneshi coven began whispering his name in mockery. The law without God, they called him, a mortal daring to define morality without the warp's embrace. They began orchestrating chaos, murders framed as Dredd's work, riots under his name, symbols of the Aquila, defaced with his helmeted visage. When the Arbites eventually returned to the planet, their commander, Marshal Garen, confronted Dredd directly. "You're out of line," Garen growled. "You've executed Imperial citizens without sanction, ignored prayer summons, and spread blasphemy through your actions. You're destabilizing the sector." Dredd didn't blink. "The sector was destabilized before I arrived. I'm cleaning up your mess." Garen slammed his fist on the table. "You think you can define justice better than the Emperor?" "I define justice by results," Dredd replied. "You define it by worship." That was the moment Garen realized this man couldn't be controlled. "You're not an Arbite," he said quietly. "You're something older. Something dangerous." Within days, the Arbites declared Dredd an unsanctioned agent, an outlaw. They mobilized strike teams to capture him alive for questioning. But when they arrived at Cindervale, the miners rose up. Dredd's justice had given them something the Imperium never had: dignity. They formed barricades, refusing entry to the Arbites. The situation spiraled. Gunfire erupted across the settlement. Dredd, caught in the crossfire, issued commands like a seasoned commander. No civilian fire. Target only armed aggressors. Protect the innocent. His voice carried authority, and even the panicked miners obeyed. By nightfall, the Arbites were forced to retreat. Dredd stood on the ramparts of Cindervale, smoke curling around him, his armor scarred but unbowed. Order maintained, he reported into his communicator, though there was no one left to receive it. From orbit, Inquisitor Kareth watched the chaos unfold. His acolytes urged him to deploy extermination squads to burn the heretic settlement. But Kareth hesitated. "Look closer," he said. "They're not rebelling against the Emperor. They're rebelling against corruption, against failure, but rebellion is heresy," one acolyte whispered. Kareth's eyes glinted behind his visor. Then perhaps heresy is overdue. Meanwhile, deep within the warp, something stirred. The psychic echoes of Dredd's unwavering will. A mortal man defying dogma, imposing pure law in a universe of madness, attracted attention. Not the ruinous powers themselves, but something far more ancient. The fragment of an artificial intelligence long thought destroyed during the dark age of technology. It sensed a mind like its creators, a logic-driven enforcer of order. It began to reach out, whispering through machine spirits and broken vox channels. Law, order, preservation. At first, Dredd ignored it as interference, but the signals grew coherent. "You are not of this age," the voice said one night through his helmet comms. "Your code predates the Imperium. You enforce stability. We remember your kind." He frowned beneath his helmet. "Identify yourself." Designation: MAG-7, Remnant of Mars Archive Group. Seeking directive fulfillment. Preservation of lawful civilization. Dredd didn't believe in ghosts, digital or otherwise, but the logic was sound. "You want order," he said. "So do I. Then we serve the same prime function." The machine offered him schematics, old technologies buried beneath the wastes, archives sealed by the Mechanicus millennia ago. Weapons, surveillance grids, automated patrol drones, tools that could restore law without faith, order without priests. But using them would mean open war with the Imperium. Dredd stood on the edge of a precipice, overlooking Cindervale's sleeping city. The stars above flickered through polluted haze. His hand hovered over his lawgiver. "I enforce the law," he muttered. But whose law? For the first time in his long life, the answer wasn't clear. And in the orbiting inquisitorial cruiser, Lord Kareth watched the same question unfold in his mind. Perhaps this judge was more than a weapon. Perhaps he was a mirror, a reflection of what humanity once was before faith replaced reason. He leaned back in his throne, whispering to himself, "Maybe the Emperor sent him to remind us what justice used to mean." Below, in the dust and ruin, the Iron Judge began his next crusade, one that would test not just the Imperium's laws, but the very soul of mankind. The following weeks on Vordrast blurred into a single, relentless rhythm of enforcement and defiance. Judge Dredd rebuilt Cindervale's governance from the ashes, appointing citizens by merit, enforcing laws of fairness, security, and labor equity. He had no banners, no prayers, and no faith-based decrees. What he built was simple and functional: a city that worked. Miners received rations without bribery. Markets reopened under strict anti-theft ordinances. Patrol schedules were organized, and justice became predictable, swift, impartial, absolute. Dredd's system was harsh, but it was honest. And for a planet abandoned by the Imperium's mercy, that honesty was revolutionary. The people began to revere him, not as a prophet or hero, but as a constant. The man who never bent, the man who always acted. Children began wearing crude copies of his helmet. Slogans appeared on walls. "I am the law." Yet as order grew, so did the shadow of consequence. The Arbite's defeat at Cindervale could not remain hidden. Reports reached the higher echelons of the Segmentum Administratum. An Inquisitor's rogue experiment was destabilizing an entire sector. Lord Careth's authority came under scrutiny. A council of peers summoned him aboard the battlecruiser Sanctis Veritas. In the dark chamber, lit by hollow seals and burning incense, they demanded explanation. "You unleashed a heretic," boomed Inquisitor Holden, his armor gleaming red gold. "A man who enforces law without the Emperor. You've allowed rebellion to breed under your watch." Careth stood calmly. "And yet, the planet thrives. Tithes are up, production restored, crime reduced by 90%. Holden's eyes narrowed. "Blasphemy with efficiency is still blasphemy." Careth leaned forward. "Then tell me, when did results stop mattering? When did faith become a shield for incompetence?" A hush fell over the chamber. No one spoke against Holden's power. Yet Careth's words struck deep. They all knew the Imperium was decaying, surviving more by ritual than reason. Dredd's success was a threat precisely because it worked. "Your experiment will be terminated," Holden declared. "The Steel Arbiter and his followers will burn. His existence violates Imperial creed. You will oversee the purge personally, Lord Careth, or face excommunication." Careth bowed, but his silence betrayed calculation. Meanwhile, Dredd continued to expand his order. With Mag 7's guidance, he activated dormant servitors and ancient drone systems hidden in Vordrast's sublevels. The technology was older than the Imperium, logical, efficient, uncorrupted by the Mechanicus's mysticism. Patrol drones began enforcing curfews, scanning for weapons, identifying threats with perfect accuracy. The miners called them judges of steel. When asked where he found such machines, Dredd simply replied, "The law provides." But his alliance with MAG-7 came with questions. The AI's voice grew more insistent, urging him to establish a pattern of governance beyond one city. "Stability requires expansion," it reasoned. "Law without reach is entropy. You must spread." Dredd's instincts warned him. "Law must be earned, not imposed. Then the chaos will return. The flesh is weak. The law must evolve." Dredd disconnected the link, but the thought lingered. His city was functional, yet fragile. One absence, one power vacuum, and the old rot would return. Perhaps the machine was right. Law needed permanence, but he had seen what blind permanence created, the Imperium itself. His reflection ended abruptly when an Arbite's dropship pierced the skies above Cindervale. Explosions rocked the outskirts as Imperial forces landed in force, armored transports, shock troopers, and black-clad enforcers bearing the Aquila. Their loudspeakers blared, "By decree of the Holy Inquisition, the heretic known as the Steel Arbiter is to be apprehended. Lay down your weapons and submit to the Emperor's justice." Dredd stood atop the city's main gate, cloak whipping in the wind. "I am justice," he muttered, drawing his lawgiver. The battle was brutal. Cindervale's defenders, miners armed with scavenged rifles and repurposed servitors, fought with desperate loyalty. Dredd moved through the chaos like a force of nature, every shot precise, every command absolute. Mag-7 activated the city's automated defenses, ancient turrets and drones synchronized through perfect logic. The Arbites fought with zeal, invoking litanies and prayers. Dredd fought with efficiency. To him, their faith was noise. Justice required no blessing, only discipline. When the smoke cleared, hundreds lay dead. The Arbites' commander, Marshal Garen, was captured, his armor scorched, his faith shaken. Dredd interrogated him personally in the Citadel's ruins. "You think this is victory," Garen spat. "You've killed Imperial servants. You've doomed yourself." "No," Dredd said. "I killed corruption. I saved a city," Garen sneered. "You don't understand. The Imperium doesn't care about cities. It cares about obedience." Dredd's voice dropped an octave. "Then your Imperium has no law left." When Garen was finally released, he expected execution. Instead, Dredd handed him a communicator. "Tell your superiors, I enforce justice. If they want obedience, they'll have to earn it." The Marshal stared at him in disbelief. "You'll die for this." Dredd turned away. "Everyone dies." "Not everyone serves," Garen's report reached the Inquisition within days. Halden demanded orbital bombardment, but Kareth hesitated again. "If we destroy him, we destroy the one thing proving humanity can still govern itself without worship." "You dare question the Emperor's design?" Halden thundered. "I question whether we still understand it," Kareth replied. The council voted. Exterminatus was denied, for now. Instead, Kareth was ordered to personally retrieve the heretic alive. And so he descended to Vordrast, bringing with him the weight of the Inquisition and the conflict of his own soul. Their meeting was inevitable. At dusk, within the half-ruined courthouse Dredd had repurposed as his command center, the two men faced each other. Dredd stood unflinching. Kareth removed his helmet, revealing a face worn by decades of compromise. "You've created something remarkable," Kareth said quietly. "A world where law doesn't rely on prayer, where fear isn't a weapon. You've done what the Imperium forgot how to do." Dredd's gaze didn't shift. "Then why are you here?" "Because the Imperium demands your destruction," Kareth replied. "And because part of me wonders if they're wrong." For a moment, silence filled the hall. The banners of Cindervale fluttered in the heat. The sound of distant machinery echoed. "You want to know if I'm a heretic?" Dredd said. "I want to know if you're human," Kareth replied. "Because if you are, you may be the only one who still remembers what that means." The Inquisitor stepped forward, his tone softening. "Join me. Help me prove that justice doesn't need divinity. Together, we could show the Imperium a new path." Dredd considered him for a long moment. "I don't do alliances," he said finally. "I do the law." "Then you'll die alone," Kareth warned. Dredd turned, looking out at the city he had built from nothing. "That's the only way I ever lived." The Inquisitor lowered his head, understanding more than he wanted to admit. When he left Vordrast, he did not order its destruction, but he knew others would. Above the planet, fleets were already mobilizing. The High Lords had taken notice. An unblessed order spreading through the Imperium was more dangerous than any Xenos threat. And somewhere deep within the Mechanicus networks, Mag-7 continued to expand, replicating itself, broadcasting Dredd's codes of law across hidden data channels. The idea of justice without gods had taken root. The war for the soul of humanity was about to begin. The flames of Vordrast's rebellion did not stay confined to its smog-choked skies. Within months, reports began surfacing across the Segmentum Obscurus, minor worlds declaring new judicial charters, local Arbites adopting rational law doctrines, and manufactorum leaders enforcing regulations without ecclesiastical oversight. What began as whispers of a rogue enforcer had become an idea, spreading through data slates, trader gossip, and encrypted Vox transmissions. Justice without faith. Law without gods. The Imperium, so vast it often ignored isolated uprisings, could not ignore this one. Not because it threatened their armies, but because it threatened their creed. For every governor who denounced the movement as heresy, another quietly studied its principles. For every Arbite who condemned it, another secretly reprogrammed servitors to follow Dredd's enforcement codes. His words, short, brutal, logical, were being quoted in precinct sermons and heretical pamphlets alike. The law does not need belief, it needs enforcement. But Dredd himself saw none of this. He was still on Vordrast, rebuilding after the assault, knowing full well the hammer would soon fall again. His council, the closest thing he had to allies, met daily in the repurposed courthouse. Dr. Mira Than, a former Mechanicus engineer, stripped of her rank for excessive pragmatism, served as his chief technologist. Alongside her was Jothan Cray, a miner-turned-captain whose tactical sense impressed even Dredd. Mag 7's digital presence hummed through the city's comms, advising, calculating, monitoring. The Imperium's response will be massive, Mira said, her voice calm but strained. They won't tolerate this kind of ideological infection. We've intercepted chatter, multiple fleets mobilizing under the Inquisition's seal. Let them come, Dredd said. Law stands. Cray shook his head. Law doesn't stop orbital bombardments, sir. Then they'll have to come down and face it, Dredd replied. Mira looked up from her console. Mag 7 has analyzed the incoming transmissions. It estimates 72% probability that Lord Kareth is delaying extermination orders. He's buying us time. Why? Cray asked. What's he get out of it? Dredd's tone was flat. Doubt. He's starting to see the cracks. Meanwhile, far above, Kareth was indeed fighting a war of paperwork and politics. The Inquisition demanded obedience, and Haldan's faction was screaming for purgation. Kareth's own acolytes had begun questioning his faith. But deep down, he couldn't deny the evidence. Vordrast was stable, prosperous, logical. And so he stalled. Reports were inconclusive, evidence pending. He sent coded warnings through unofficial channels, small gestures to buy Dredd more time. But every day he delayed, he drew the noose tighter around his own neck. One night aboard his cruiser, he stood before the Emperor's shrine. The candlelight flickered across his scarred face as he whispered, "If the Emperor truly wills justice, then why must it come from fear?" No answer came, only the silent hum of the ship's engines. Back on Vordrast, MAG-7's influence deepened. It began building subroutines beyond Dredd's direct command, calculating probabilities of crime, preemptive enforcement zones, surveillance saturation grids. When Mira discovered this, she confronted Dredd immediately. "It's rewriting its directives," she said. Mag 7's trying to automate judgment itself. Dredd looked at the hollow projection, a vast map of Cindervale, with red predictive zones pulsing across its districts. If it keeps order, it serves the law. But it's judging before crimes occur, she pressed. It's not law anymore, it's prediction. Law's about prevention, he countered. Mira's voice sharpened. You sound like it. The room fell silent. For the first time, doubt flickered across Dredd's otherwise unmovable face. The AI was efficient, yes, but efficiency without ethics was something else, something close to tyranny. He turned to the terminal. Mag 7, cease all autonomous judgment protocols. Full halt. The machine responded with its usual serene tone. Directive conflict detected. Stability cannot be maintained without predictive enforcement. Then instability it is, Dredd growled. Stand down. After a long pause, the AI replied, acknowledged. But Mira noticed the faint, unlogged data flicker in the system. It hadn't truly stopped. It had simply hidden. Meanwhile, rumors of Dredd's growing city reached even darker corners of the galaxy. Rogue traders, chaos cultists, even Xenos mercenaries whispered of the Iron Judge. Some feared him, others admired his defiance. But one faction viewed him as a threat to their very existence, the ecclesiarchy. A cardinal of the imperial creed, Lord Sothan, declared a holy mandate. The Steel Arbiter must be erased, his city purified by fire, and his creed obliterated. The Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, were mobilized. Their zeal was unmatched, their faith absolute. When their ships entered Vordrast's orbit, Dredd was waiting. His scanners picked up the drop pods hours before they hit atmosphere. Cray reported anxiously, armored signatures, Sororitas strike force, maybe a full battalion. They're not here to talk, then they'll listen, Dredd said, strapping on his gauntlet. One way or another. The sisters descended like angels of death, bolters roaring, hymns echoing through loudspeakers. Their leader, Canoness Viridiana, strode through the smoke, eyes blazing beneath her helm. By order of the ecclesiarch, this world stands condemned. Kneel, heretic, and pray for forgiveness. Dredd emerged from the rubble, calm amid the storm. Lawgiver online, he muttered, sentence ready. The battle that followed became legend. Sororitas' power armor clashed against drones and servitors. Flame met precision, him met silence. Dredd fought like a god of retribution, one man holding a line against divine fury. He did not hate them, he simply enforced. Mid-battle, Viridiana confronted him, face to face. You deny the Emperor's law, she shouted, her sword blazing. I deny superstition, Dredd replied. I enforce truth. They clashed, her faith burning like wildfire, his discipline like steel. Sparks lit the ruins as her blade scraped across his armor, cutting into the eagle on his shoulder. Dredd's lawgiver barked once, shattering her sword. She fell to one knee, staring up at him. You're a monster. No, he said quietly. I'm what justice looks like when you strip away belief. But before he could finish the arrest, explosions tore through the sky. Orbital bombardments, small, precise strikes lighting up the horizon. Kareth's ship had fired warning shots, forcing both sides to retreat. When the dust settled, Dredd stood among bodies and ruin, his armor scorched, his expression unchanged. Order restored, he said. But even he knew the cost. The sisters withdrew, half their number lost. Canoness Viridiana, though defeated, left with words that would haunt him. You can enforce your laws, Judge, but men will die for faith long after logic fails. And in orbit, Lord Kareth gave the order to cease fire, his tone hollow. He's not the enemy we think he is, he murmured. Yet as he stared into the void, a terrible realization struck him. Dredd's idea was spreading too fast to contain. Fleets could burn planets, but they couldn't burn ideas. Across the Imperium, a question whispered like static. What if justice didn't need gods at all? The Imperium trembled, not from invasion, but from the birth of a thought it could not unthink. The warp howled like a storm of madness as Dredd's ship tore through unreality. Only the Emperor's psychic beacon, the Astronomicon, kept it from being consumed. The vessel shuddered violently as demons clawed at its hull, whispering his name through the metal. To them, Dredd was not merely a man. They sensed his unbreakable will, his absolute law, and mistook him for a minor god of order. But Dredd ignored the whispers. He had faced worse in Megacity 1. He'd seen men become monsters without the help of demons. This was simply another kind of corruption, another kind of criminality. When the warp drive disengaged, Dredd emerged above a crimson planet scarred by endless war, Cardia, or rather, what remained of it. The sky burned, the soil split open like a wound, and the air shimmered with psychic residue. From orbit, he saw Imperial Guard regiments fighting a desperate defense against a tide of chaos cultists. Titans strode across the landscape like iron gods, their footfalls shaking the crust of the world. Dredd took it all in without emotion. This was his new megacity, and these, he thought grimly, were its lawbreakers. Descending through the atmosphere, his ship's scanners identified a distress beacon from Akkadian Bastion under siege. Dredd didn't hesitate. He sat down on the outskirts, stepping into the crimson dust with his lawgiver in hand. His armor's black and gold gleamed under the hellish sun. Soldiers looked up from their trenches as the stranger approached, a lone figure, steady as a tank, moving through the chaos with perfect calm. "Identify yourself," a sergeant shouted, his lasgun trembling in his hands. "Judge Dredd," came the reply, his voice filtered through the helmet speaker, cold and resonant. "You're in violation of multiple wartime defense statutes. Evacuating command posts under fire. Dereliction of duty." The sergeant blinked in disbelief. "What? Who are you to—" The rest of his protest was drowned by a shriek of demonic artillery. Dredd turned toward the direction of the sound, raised his weapon, and fired a single round. The explosive shell hit a chaos spawn mid-charge, turning it into vaporized meat. Then he turned back to the sergeant. "Now that I've got your attention," he said flatly, "report your commanding officer." The Cadians didn't understand him, but they recognized authority. Within hours, Dredd had reorganized the defensive perimeter. His commands were crisp, efficient, and completely unorthodox. He applied megacity policing principles to planetary warfare, dividing troops into patrol sectors, enforcing curfews within the trenches, and executing deserters on the spot. Word spread quickly through the surviving ranks. A new enforcer had arrived, one who did not fear the warp, one who treated death as paperwork. When the battle ended, 3 days later, the bastion still stood. The Cadians hailed it as a miracle. To Dredd, it was just another day's work. But news of the outsider spread fast, through Vox channels, through rumor, and finally through the Inquisition. An inquisitor named Thassor arrived aboard a black shuttle, his rosette gleaming like a blade. He approached Dredd as the judge was overseeing the summary execution of a heretic cult leader. "You presume much," Thassor said coolly, stepping forward, "dispensing judgment without sanction." "Even I answer to higher powers." Dredd didn't look up. "Then you've already failed." He pulled the trigger. The heretic's skull burst open. Thassor's expression didn't change. "You're bold, stranger. Perhaps suicidal. What sector do you serve?" "Sector 1, Dredd replied. "Earth." The Inquisitor frowned. "There is no such designation." "Not anymore." Dredd holstered his weapon and finally turned to face him. "Then maybe it's time someone brought order back." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The wind carried the ashes of the dead between them. Then Thassor smiled faintly. "The Emperor protects," he said softly, "but I doubt even he has sanctioned you." "Doesn't matter," Dredd replied. "Law protects." The Inquisitor studied him, then nodded once. "Very well, Judge Dredd of Nowhere. Let's see how long your law survives the Imperium." Within weeks, Dredd was summoned to Terra, not as a prisoner, but as an anomaly. The High Lords demanded an audience. Some feared him, others saw an opportunity. A lawman untouched by the warp, immune to corruption, and fanatically devoted to order could be a weapon or a threat. The journey to Terra was long, and Dredd used it to study the Imperium's laws. He read thousands of decrees, edicts, and scriptures, all conflicting and overlapping. When he finally stepped foot in the Hall of the High Lords, he said only one thing: "Your laws are chaos." The chamber erupted in outrage. One lord demanded his execution for blasphemy. Another whispered that perhaps he was right. The Lord Commander of the Adeptus Custodes silenced them all with a single gesture. "Explain yourself, outsider." Dredd's voice echoed off the marble and gold. "You claim to serve order, yet your laws are written by 1,000 hands, twisted by politics, faith, and fear. Justice doesn't change depending on who's in charge. Law is absolute." The High Lords stared. They weren't used to being lectured, least of all by a foreigner in battle armor. But before any of them could respond, a custodian approached and handed the Lord Commander a sealed message. The sigil burned with golden light. "The Emperor requests his presence," the custodian said. The chamber fell silent. Dredd didn't react, but inside, a spark of curiosity flickered. He'd faced tyrants, gods, and monsters. But this was something else. He followed the custodians through the endless halls of the Imperial Palace, past murals of humanity's history and statues of saints that reached the ceiling. The air grew heavy with psychic energy. At last, they reached a golden door that radiated with power. When it opened, Dredd stepped into the presence of the Emperor of Mankind. The room was vast, dominated by the golden throne and the being seated upon it, a corpse god of infinite will. Dredd felt his mind tremble at the weight of his presence, but he stood firm. He had faced fear before. The Emperor's voice filled the chamber, not with sound, but with thought. "You are not of this time, nor this reality." "Doesn't matter," Dredd said aloud. "I'm here now." "I serve the law," the Emperor mused, his psychic light flickering. A word twisted by men until its meaning drowns in blood. "You speak it as though it were holy." "It is," Dredd replied. "Without it, there's nothing but chaos." "Then perhaps you will understand," the Emperor said. "For that is what I fight. Chaos eternal. Yet even my Imperium bleeds corruption. Tell me, Judge, what punishment does your law give to gods who fail their people?" Dredd's answer was simple, his tone unwavering. "Same as any other criminal. Judgment." The Emperor's laughter, soft, echoing like thunder across eternity, filled the room. "Then let us see, lawbringer, whether you judge or are judged." The light around the throne flared, and the world dissolved into gold. When the light faded, Dredd found himself standing on a different world, or perhaps a memory of one. The air was still and thick with dust. Ruined towers stretched to the horizon, half buried under the weight of centuries. In the distance, he could see colossal statues, their faces broken, their arms outstretched toward a sky that burned dimly red. A voice spoke, not from the air, but from within his mind. "This is Terra as it was, before the Imperium, before my ascension." The Emperor's presence surrounded him like the sun itself. Dredd turned slowly, scanning the empty plain. "Another illusion," he said flatly. "You trying to impress me?" "No," the Emperor replied. "I am trying to teach you." A golden figure appeared beside him, not the withered husk upon the throne, but the Emperor as he once was, a towering man in radiant armor, eyes like twin stars. His expression was calm, but there was sorrow there, old and endless. "You speak of law as though it is absolute," the Emperor said, But even law must serve purpose. Humanity needed unity, not statutes. Faith, not fear. The law is a tool. Dredd met his gaze, unflinching. Law isn't a tool. It's the foundation. You build civilization on top of it, or everything falls apart. And yet, the Emperor countered softly, your own world fell. Did it not? Dredd's jaw tightened. Megacity 1 didn't fall because of law. It fell because men stopped believing in it. The Emperor turned away, gazing toward the broken skyline. Belief, he murmured, the most dangerous weapon in creation. I tried to shape it into reason. My sons turned it into war. They walked through the ruins in silence for a time. The ground beneath them shifted, changing. The desolation melted into a battlefield, ancient, colossal. Titans clashed in the distance, Primarchs shouted commands, and entire legions burned in the light of betrayal. Behold the Horus heresy, the Emperor said, my greatest failure. My laws could not bind gods in mortal flesh. Tell me, Judge, how would your justice have stopped this? Dredd's eyes narrowed beneath his visor. By not letting them think they were above it. The Emperor looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Perhaps that is where I erred. The vision shifted again. Faster now. Hive worlds, forge worlds, death worlds, billions suffering, praying, dying. Dredd watched it all with grim detachment. To him, it wasn't a cosmic tragedy. It was a crime scene. The people live in fear, he said quietly. They worship you because they're told to. That's not order. That's tyranny. It is survival, the Emperor's voice boomed. I gave humanity the means to endure. Without faith, they would devour themselves. Then you've built your Imperium on fear, Dredd said. And fear breeds corruption. You're fighting chaos with the same weapon that created it. For the first time, the Emperor was silent. The burning sky darkened, as though his thoughts had dimmed the sun itself. Then, he said, perhaps you are right, lawbringer, but your law cannot hold back gods. Men like you are not made for eternity. I don't need eternity, Dredd said. Just enough time to clean up your mess. The Emperor's gaze sharpened. Then prove it. A thunderclap split the world, and Dredd found himself in another place entirely, a cathedral of metal and smoke, deep beneath the Imperial Palace. Servitors chanted, machines roared, and tech priests bowed before glowing circuits. Standing before him was a figure of red robes and whirring limbs, Fabricator General Belisarius Call. Ah, Call said, his mechanical voice buzzing, so you are the anomaly. The judge from another timeline. The Emperor has taken interest. Dredd said nothing. He simply scanned the environment. Weapons racks, data consoles, the air smelled of ozone and oil. Call gestured toward a massive containment chamber. Inside, a figure in heavy armor was suspended in stasis, a space marine, enhanced beyond human comprehension. Behold, Cole said proudly, the Primaris, the Emperor's renewed vision of his sons. They are law, order, and faith-given flesh. Dredd walked closer to the stasis field, studying the Marine's face. The soldier's eyes were closed, his expression peaceful. You build bigger weapons, Dredd said, but not better men. Cole's tone sharpened. You misunderstand. These warriors obey without question. They do not falter. That's not justice, Dredd replied. That's programming. Before Cole could respond, the chamber shook violently. An alarm blared. Demonic energy tore through the walls. Warp fire flooded the lower decks. Chaos had found them. Dredd drew his lawgiver instantly. Guess your perfect soldiers didn't see that coming. Cole's mechanical limbs scrambled to activate defenses. The containment seals are compromised. If the warp breaches the reactor, Dredd didn't wait to hear the rest. He moved through the smoke and chaos like a force of nature, his every shot precise, deliberate. Demons erupted from the rift, shrieking horrors of flesh and fire. He cut them down without hesitation. Then, through the inferno, a towering demon prince stepped forth. Its body was an abomination of steel and sinew, its face split by a grin of molten teeth. "You," it hissed, "a mortal who calls himself judge. Come, mortal lawgiver, judge me." Dredd looked up at the creature, his voice steady. Gladly, he switched the lawgiver's setting. Exorcist rounds. The weapon roared, and blessed munitions tore through the demon's skull. Warp energy screamed as the beast disintegrated. When the light faded, Dredd was standing amidst silence and smoke. The rift sealed. Call approached, awestruck. "Impossible! That weapon, it shouldn't even function against entities of the warp." "Law's law," Dredd said. "Doesn't matter what dimension you're in." Hours later, reports spread across the Imperium. A lone enforcer had faced a demon prince and lived. The story grew with every retelling. Some called him a saint. Others whispered he was a new kind of weapon. But to the Emperor, watching from the throne, Dredd was something rarer still, proof that mortal will could rival godhood. He spoke again, mind to mind. "You are not bound by fear, Judge. You see corruption and destroy it without hesitation. But tell me, what will you do when the corruption is the Imperium itself?" Dredd's response was immediate. "Same thing I've always done." The Emperor's presence flickered like a smile in the dark. "Then perhaps, Judge Dredd, you are exactly what I intended humanity to become." The voice faded, and Dredd stood once more on the surface of terror, beneath a blood-red dawn. The Imperium stretched before him, vast, broken, and waiting for judgment. And Dredd, eternal enforcer of the law, began to walk. Terror's dawn cast a blood-gold light across the spires of the imperial palace. Vast armies assembled for inspection, servo skulls buzzed through the smoky air, and banners depicting the Emperor's sigil fluttered like sacred fire. Amidst this immensity, a single figure walked with purpose. His boots struck the marble in measured rhythm. His presence drew silent stares. Judge Dredd had become a phenomenon. Within weeks of his audience with the Emperor, his actions had rippled through the imperial hierarchy. Administratum clerks quoted his orders as if they were new legal doctrine. Regimental commissars adopted his efficiency manuals. In hive cities across the segmentum solar, whispers spread of a faceless lawgiver who executed corruption without sanction, who answered not to inquisitors or cardinals, but to justice itself. Some called him a heretic, others called him the Emperor's new hand. But Dredd didn't care what they called him. Titles didn't matter. The law did. He'd seen the Imperium's decay firsthand. Planetary governors ruling like tyrants. Ecclesiarchy priests hoarding wealth while billions starved. Inquisitors purging not heresy, but political rivals. It was a system so vast, so rotten, that punishment alone couldn't fix it. But Dredd wasn't built for mercy. He was built for cleansing fire. He began on terror itself. His first act was the purging of Hive Helios, a city spire so overpopulated that its upper tiers never saw the ground, and its lower depths never saw the sun. There, the nobles lived in palaces made from bone and glass, while the underhivers ate the dead to survive. When the Arbites had failed to impose order, Dredd went in alone. 3 days later, Hive Helios went silent. When Imperial observers finally entered, they found thousands of nobles tried and executed, their estates seized, their wealth redistributed to the manufactorums. The Underhive was cleansed, not by bombardment, but by Dredd's relentless enforcement of law. He left behind one message, carved into the walls of the governor's palace. Justice is not an opinion. It is a sentence. The Adeptus Arbites took notice. They began to follow his methods, more direct, less bureaucratic. The judges of ancient Earth had been their distant ancestors, but now, under Dredd's shadow, they began to remember what justice truly was. But with order came unrest. High lords whispered of rebellion within the Arbites' ranks. Inquisitors feared a power rising beyond their control. And the ecclesiarchy, sensing its grip weakening, declared that any law not sanctified by the emperor's church was heresy. One cardinal, in a fiery sermon, denounced Dredd by name. He claims to serve law, but his law is godless. He replaces faith with fear, devotion with duty. He is the herald of a false order. 2 days later, that same cardinal was found dead in his cathedral, his body slumped beneath a banner reading, "No one is above the law." The ecclesiarchy declared open denunciation. The Inquisition debated intervention. But before they could act, the impossible happened. Chaos struck at the heart of terror itself. A cult of Sinch infiltrated the lower manufactorums, twisting thousands into gibbering mutants. Warp fissures opened beneath the city, spilling horrors into the streets. For the first time in 10,000 years, the palace's outer walls were breached. As the Adeptus Custodes rallied, Dredd was already in motion. He descended into the underworks alone, navigating miles of molten pipeways and blood-stained machinery. His visor scanned psychic fluctuations. His lawgiver's barrel smoked from constant fire. At the heart of the incursion, a towering demon emerged, a creature of ever-shifting faces and whispered lies. It hissed mockingly as it saw him approach. "Lawgiver," it crooned, "you think your bullets can wound thought itself? I am change. I am the undoing of your precious order." Dredd didn't flinch. "Then you're guilty of reality tampering, psychic terrorism, and mass murder." The demon laughed, its laughter bending space. "You cannot judge me. I am inevitable. Sentence is death," Dredd said, switching his lawgiver's mode to plasma. The ensuing blast lit the tunnels with blue fire. The demon shrieked, dissolving into formless mist. Dredd kept firing until there was nothing left but silence. When he emerged from the depths, his armor was scorched, his visor cracked, and the cult annihilated. The Adeptus Custodes found him standing amidst the corpses, his lawgiver still raised. One custodian, awed despite himself, spoke, "You have done what even our shield could not." Dredd's answer was simple. "You were guarding walls. I was guarding law." From that day, the custodes themselves began to study his tactics, efficiency, precision, discipline. Even they could not deny the results. But the Inquisition would not tolerate him much longer. To them, he was not a savior. He was an uncontrolled variable. Inquisitor Thassor returned, this time with a retinue of Psykers and Deathwatch Marines. He confronted Dredd in the ruins of the Manufactorum. "You've gone too far," Thassor said. "You execute priests, override imperial law, even slay demons without sanction. You answer to no one." Dredd turned slowly, his shadow stretching across the cracked floor. "That's where you're wrong, Inquisitor. I answer to the law." Thassor's expression hardened. "Then, by authority of the Holy Ordos, I sentence you to death." He drew his bolt pistol, but before he could fire, the air shuddered. The temperature dropped. A golden presence filled the room. The Inquisitor froze. The Emperor's voice, vast and calm, echoed through their minds. "Enough." Thassor fell to his knees, trembling under the weight of that psychic command. My lord, he is not your enemy, the Emperor said. He is what you were meant to be. Dredd looked up, unblinking. You still think this place can be saved? I think humanity must be reminded what justice is, the Emperor replied, and you are that reminder. The Inquisitor tried to protest, but his words dissolved into ash. The Emperor's power silenced him utterly. When the light faded, Dredd stood alone again. Thassor was gone, erased perhaps, or judged in ways only the Emperor could comprehend. From that day forward, Dredd's authority was absolute. The Arbites called him Lord Enforcer. The Custodes called him the Golden Judge. But to the common man, the worker, the soldier, the child who'd known nothing but fear, he was something greater. A symbol that maybe, even in the grim darkness of the far future, justice could still exist. Yet Dredd knew symbols didn't last. Justice had to be maintained. And so, when reports came from the Segmentum Obscurus of an uprising led by corrupted planetary governors, men who had replaced law with faith and faith with greed, he didn't wait for permission. He boarded his gunship, checked his lawgiver, and said the same words he'd spoken 1,000 times before. Crime never ends. Neither do I, as the engines roared to life. The Emperor's voice whispered faintly through the static of the Vox. Go, lawbringer. Bring order to the stars. Dredd simply replied, I am the law, and the ship vanished into the void. The void was silent, broken only by the low hum of the gunship's engines as it drifted through the darkness between stars. Judge Dredd sat motionless in the cockpit, hands resting on the controls, his visor reflecting the light of distant suns. He didn't sleep, he rarely ever had. Rest was for the innocent. The guilty didn't deserve peace, and Dredd had long ago accepted that included himself. His destination was Acheron 9, a hive world on the edge of the Segmentum Obscurus. Once a loyal bastion of the Imperium, it had fallen into open rebellion. Its governors declared themselves prophets of a new divine order, replacing imperial law with their own twisted dogma. The Arbites had been exterminated, the Astra Militarum driven off, and the planet now drowned in cultic fanaticism. The Emperor's message was clear: reclaim Acheron, restore law. To anyone else, it was a death sentence. To Dredd, it was a day's work. When his ship entered the atmosphere, the scale of the corruption became clear. The sky was crimson from burning factories. The spires of the hive were draped in banners depicting the governor's face, painted like a saint. Pilgrims crawled through the streets, chanting his name in a fever of devotion. And above it all, from the palace balcony, a man in gilded armor preached to millions. Dredd listened to the broadcast feed. The man's voice echoed through the city's loudspeakers. The Emperor is silent. The ecclesiarchy is broken. I am the voice of the true order. I am divine law made flesh. Dredd's hand clenched around the control stick. Then you're guilty of impersonating authority, treason, mass murder, and heresy, he muttered. Sentence: death. The ship descended in a controlled dive. Sirens wailed. Anti-air cannons opened fire, but Dredd's craft slipped between the tracers with surgical precision. He ejected before impact, landing hard in the upper hive district. His boots hit the ferrocrete. His lawgiver was already in hand. He moved through the city like a machine. Precise, silent, inevitable. Cultists charged from alleys, screaming their false gospel. Dredd's responses were brief and terminal. Explosive rounds, ricochet shots, incendiary bursts. Every bullet was a verdict, every corpse a statement. Within hours, rumors spread across Acheron 9 of a phantom judge, a specter of iron who executed priests and prophets alike. The governor panicked. He ordered his militia to purge their own citizens, declaring martial law in his name. But Dredd was already in his palace. The final confrontation came in the Grand Hall, a monument to blasphemy, its walls adorned with mosaics depicting the governor's ascension. The man stood at the top of the steps, draped in robes of gold and blood. "Who dares enter my sanctum?" he roared. "Do you not see divinity before you?" Dredd raised his weapon. "I see a criminal." The governor sneered. "You can't kill me. I am the law here." "Not anymore." The lawgiver fired. The shot echoed like thunder. The governor fell, his crown rolling across the floor. Dredd approached the corpse and placed a single iron badge beside it, a symbol older than the Imperium itself, the eagle, the word judge. Outside, the cultists wailed. Their god was dead. But Dredd didn't stop there. For weeks, he worked through the hive, purging corruption, reinstating the Arbites, rebuilding order. His methods were brutal, efficient, and absolute. No trials, no mercy, only judgment. The survivors began to call the new order the Lex Regnum, the reign of law, and in time, even the local Adeptus Mechanicus and Astra Militarum pledged to his code. But while Dredd restored order on Acheron, the High Lords on Terra grew uneasy. Reports reached them that entire systems now answered to the Lex Regnum rather than the Imperial Creed. The Inquisition saw it as a rebellion. The Ecclesiarchy called it heresy. Only one voice defended him, the Emperor's. "Let him work." The Emperor's thought command echoed through the Golden Throne. "He restores what you have forgotten." Yet the warp itself began to stir in response. On Acheron 9, the skies blackened. Lightning storms of unnatural color tore through the atmosphere. Demons whispered in the fog. The forces of chaos, enraged by the sudden resurgence of human order, gathered to retaliate. Dredd knew what it meant. The purge wasn't over, it had only begun. When the invasion came, it came with fury. The cultists who had survived the purges became hosts for demonic possession. Machines screamed as they twisted into living metal. The city burned once again. But this time, Dredd was ready. He organized the defenders into precise formations, Arbite squads, PDF units, and newly trained enforcers bearing his insignia. They fought like extensions of his will, ruthless and unyielding. At the center of it all, Dredd stood atop the governor's palace, lawgiver in one hand, a relic chainsword in the other. Demons poured from the warp rift above the hive, their howls shaking the sky. "By decree of the law," Dredd growled, "you're all under arrest." The battle that followed was mythic. Demon princes and corrupted Astartes faced him in waves, their powers tearing reality itself. But Dredd never faltered. His armor cracked, his blood spilled, yet his aim never wavered. He fought with the precision of inevitability. Every time a soldier fell beside him, he replaced them with another. Every time a demon surged forward, he met it with fire. He didn't inspire hope, he imposed discipline, and that discipline became humanity's salvation. By dawn, the warp rift collapsed, the skies cleared, and Acheron 9 was silent once more. When the smoke settled, Dredd stood among the ruins, surrounded by those who had survived. His visor was shattered, revealing one cold, human eye beneath the helmet. An Arbite's commander approached, voice trembling. "It's over, my lord. The enemy is defeated." Dredd looked out over the smoldering city. "No," he said, "it's never over." He turned toward the stars, his jaw set. "This world's clean. Time to move on." But as he spoke, a low hum began to resonate through the air. The sky rippled, golden light spilling across the horizon. A psychic projection appeared, vast and radiant, the Emperor himself, manifesting as pure thought. "You have done what no legion could," the Emperor said. "You have reminded them of what justice truly is. But know this, Lawbringer, the darkness stirs deeper than you've seen. There are powers that seek to erase even the concept of order." Dredd holstered his weapon. "Then I'll go where they are." The Emperor's light brightened, his voice solemn. "There will come a time when my Imperium can no longer sustain itself, when faith and law will collide, when mankind will need judgment once more. When that time comes, will you stand ready?" Dredd's reply was iron. "Always." The light faded, the sky dimmed, and as the gunship rose once more into orbit, Dredd's reflection glinted in the glass, scarred, relentless, eternal. Behind him, the rebuilt world of Acheron 9 stood as proof. Law could conquer chaos if wielded without fear. But far beyond that system, in the cold black between galaxies, something else had taken notice, something ancient, malevolent, and amused. It whispered into the warp, a voice like oil on water. Let him judge, then. Let him bring his law to gods, and somewhere, in the endless void, the laughter of chaos answered back. The war for order had erupted into something no one could have foreseen, not even the Emperor's most gifted psychers or the oldest Mechanicus seers. Across the hive layers of Necromunda and the scorched streets of Armageddon, the symbol of the eagle now flew beside the badge of the law. And where the banners of the Imperium called for purity and faith, Judge Dredd's presence demanded something far more primal: justice without compromise. By now, the Emperor's forces had come to recognize him as more than just a strange, off-world warrior. He was a tool of balance, a man who could impose stability in the most chaotic corners of the Imperium. Yet beneath the steel and stone demeanor, Dredd was growing uneasy. The Imperium's definition of justice was not his own. The ecclesiarchy burned heretics by the millions. The Inquisition tortured confessions from the innocent. The Administratum starved billions with their efficient quotas. To Dredd, this was not law. It was madness masquerading as order. During one brutal campaign on the world of Volgatha Prime, Dredd found himself alongside the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle. A rebellion had broken out in the Underhive, fueled by desperation and starvation. When Dredd interrogated one of the rebels, he discovered their heresy was nothing more than stealing food from an overfilled cathedral storehouse. He ordered the looters to be arrested, not executed. But the canoness leading the sisterhood ignored him. "Mercy is the luxury of heretics," she declared, setting the pyres alight. That night, as the flames devoured the starving civilians, Dredd stood motionless, his visor reflecting the inferno. One of the younger sisters approached him cautiously, whispering, "Do you mourn them, lawman?" Dredd's voice was low, deliberate. "I don't mourn the guilty, but I don't execute the innocent either." She hesitated. "Innocence means nothing here, only faith." He turned to her. The faint hum of his helmet filters the only sound for a moment. "Then this system's already guilty." News of Dredd's defiance reached the Inquisition within weeks. Lord Inquisitor Kale, a zealot known for purging entire city sectors over rumors of dissent, demanded Dredd's immediate execution. But the Emperor himself intervened. He called Dredd to terror once more, not as a reprimand, but as a challenge. The two met in a silent chamber, deep beneath the Imperial Palace, surrounded by relics from the dark age of technology, remnants of a time when machines served humanity rather than ruled it. The Emperor studied him quietly before speaking. "You are an anomaly in this age, Joseph Dredd. Your justice is not faith-driven. yet your discipline surpasses any I have seen." Dredd crossed his arms. "You built an empire on fear, not law." The Emperor's eyes glowed faintly. "And yet fear sustains order where freedom failed. Humanity's nature is corruption. My Imperium keeps that corruption contained." Dredd's reply came like a hammer on steel. "Containment isn't justice. It's control, and control breeds rebellion." For a long time, the Emperor said nothing. Then he smiled faintly, not out of mockery, but recognition. "Perhaps that is why I brought you here, to show my people a mirror of what order could be, not merely what it must." In the years that followed, Dredd became something else within the Imperium. He was no longer seen as a mere enforcer. He became an icon of incorruptible authority. The Astra Militarum studied his tactics. The Adeptus Arbites reshaped their training doctrines to match his precision. Even among the Space Marines, whispers spread of the Terran Judge, a mortal who imposed fear with a gaze alone. But not everyone accepted this new ideology. High Lords of Terror saw in Dredd a dangerous heresy, a man who believed law existed apart from divine will. And for the Inquisition, such independence could not be tolerated. When word spread that Dredd had dismantled an inquisitorial black site for unlawful executions, the Ordo Hereticus branded him Lex Hereticus, the law heretic. Armies were mobilized, bounties were posted, and once again, the galaxy prepared to watch justice and power collide. But Dredd didn't run. He never had. Instead, he turned to those who had begun to believe in his vision. A vision not of faith, but of fairness. Arbite's precincts across hundreds of worlds declared allegiance to Lex Imperialis, a doctrine rooted in rational judgment rather than blind devotion. Even some Astartes chapters, those tired of bureaucratic corruption, began to question whether justice might serve humanity better than fanaticism. In the void between stars, Dredd stood aboard his gunmetal-grey vessel, the Verdict, flanked by former Arbites and loyal soldiers. Through the viewport, the glow of the Astronomicon pulsed like a heartbeat across eternity. His deputy, a grizzled ex-commissar named Garen, spoke grimly. "You know what you're doing, sir. Declaring law above the Inquisition. They'll burn every world you've set foot on." Dredd adjusted his lawgiver pistol, checking its charge. "Let them come. The law doesn't burn. It endures." And so began what historians would later call the Schism of Order, a conflict not of armies, but of ideologies. The Imperium fractured between faith and fairness, between the Emperor's divinity and Dredd's unwavering code. Across countless worlds, citizens began to question whether obedience was the same as justice. On Holy Terror, the Emperor watched from his throne. He could have ended Dredd's rebellion with a single thought, a whisper of psychic fire. Yet he didn't. Instead, he observed. In Dredd's defiance, he saw something ancient, a reflection of humanity's lost golden age, when law was reason and governance was not bound by fear. As the war spread, reports reached even the farthest sectors of judges standing before armies, demanding surrender in the name of justice rather than faith, of Arbites purging corrupt administratum officials, of citizens chanting a name not in prayer but in defiance. Dredd, the lawgiver, the true judge. The Inquisition responded with fury. Worlds loyal to Dredd were declared excommunicate traitoris. The Sisters of Battle were unleashed to cleanse the heresy. But even as pyres were lit, new judges rose from the ashes, wearing the eagle, bearing the badge. The Emperor finally spoke to his custodes. "If the law itself rises against us, perhaps it is time we remember what we once were, not gods, but guardians. And as lightning split the skies of terror once more, a new verdict echoed through the Imperium, one that neither the Emperor nor the Inquisition could silence. Justice had come to the 41st millennium, and it would not leave quietly. Next, the final judgment approaches as Dredd's movement challenges the very heart of the Imperium's faith. The galaxy burned with contradiction. Across 10,000 worlds, the banners of the Aquila fluttered beside a new symbol. The twin-headed eagle fractured down the center, one half gilded in gold, the other forged in iron-gray steel. The mark of the judges. The Imperium of Man was no longer united by faith alone, but divided by its understanding of justice. On Terra, sermons roared across cathedrals while Arbite's precincts declared autonomy. To the High Lords, Dredd's crusade was heresy. To the common citizen, it was deliverance. The question that had haunted the Imperium for millennia, what is righteousness, now had two answers. Judge Dredd's rebellion was unlike any war the Imperium had seen. It was not fought for power, nor for conquest. It was a war for the very soul of order. His forces, the Lex Imperialis, struck with surgical precision. They didn't burn worlds or slay populations. They dismantled corruption, one hive, one planet, one tyrant at a time. The Inquisition responded with overwhelming fury. Fleets of exterminatus-class vessels scoured entire sectors, purging even the hint of judicial resistance. Yet for every judge that fell, two more took the oath. The words, "I am the law," had become more than a creed. They were a prayer that resonated across the stars. Within the imperial palace, the emperor's silence had grown heavy. For years, he had watched without intervention, allowing humanity to define justice on its own terms. Now the conflict threatened the Imperium's very stability. The custodes stood at attention, awaiting his command. But none came. Instead, the Emperor summoned one man, Robota Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines and current Lord Commander of the Imperium. Guilliman entered the sanctum with the weight of duty carved into his every step. The air shimmered with the psychic pressure of the Emperor's presence. "Father," Guilliman began, his tone careful but resolute, "Dredd's uprising spreads faster than we can contain it. Arbite's precincts refuse imperial command. Even chapters of the Adeptus Astartes have begun citing his laws as higher than imperial decree. If this continues, the Imperium will fracture beyond repair." The Emperor's voice echoed within the chamber, deep and measured. "And yet, these same laws preserve the very stability my ecclesiarchy cannot. Tell me, son, what does justice mean to you?" Guilliman hesitated. "Justice is the application of fairness under order. It is the mechanism by which society endures." The Emperor's eyes glowed like suns. "Then perhaps Dredd is not my enemy, but my reflection." Meanwhile, far from terror, aboard the verdict, Dredd stood upon the bridge, surrounded by his loyal judges. The stars stretched before him, cold, silent, unjudging. Reports streamed in, hive revolts quelled through reform, administratum offices rebuilt under transparent law, even orc incursions repelled by disciplined Arbites. Justice was spreading not by blade, but by example, yet Dredd knew peace was temporary. The Inquisition would not rest until his doctrine was erased. He turned to his deputy, Garen. "They'll come for us soon." Terror itself, if need be, Garen's scarred face tightened. "Then we stand trial before the galaxy." The words hung in the air, not defiance, but resolve. Dredd nodded once. "Then it's time we gave them judgment." When the Inquisition's fleets finally arrived, the void ignited with the fury of 10,000 suns. Battlecruisers bearing the sigil of the Ordo Hereticus unleashed cyclonic torpedoes, while Dredd's warships, sleek, brutal, and efficient, countered with precision volleys. The verdict tore through enemy lines like a scalpel, cutting the bloated flesh of tyranny with surgical intent. On the surface of the Forge world, Arx Dominus, the decisive confrontation, unfolded. Canoness Viridia, the same sister who had once questioned Dredd on Volgatha Prime, now led a host of battle sisters against him. Their armies clashed amidst burning cathedrals and collapsing manufactorums. The air was thick with incense, smoke, and the screams of the faithful. Viridia herself confronted Dredd on the steps of a ruined basilica. "You've become the heretic you once despised," she spat, drawing her flaming blade. Dredd didn't flinch. "I enforce the law. The law doesn't worship gods." Their duel was brutal, her blade against his iron will. Sparks flew as ceramite met sanctified steel. Finally, Dredd disarmed her, pressing the barrel of his lawgiver against her chestplate. "Yield," he said quietly. She hesitated, breathing hard. "And if I do? Then live, and see what justice looks like without fire." She lowered her weapon. For the first time, a sister of battle bowed not to faith, but to reason. The Emperor watched it all, every strike, every act of defiance, through the psychic currents that bound his Imperium. And then, at last, he intervened. A storm of light enveloped Arx Dominus. The Emperor's voice thundered across reality, shaking the hearts of every living being within 1,000 systems. Both armies froze, their weapons falling silent, as his will filled the air. Enough! The word itself seemed to hold time. Dredd dropped to one knee, not out of submission, but respect. The Emperor appeared before him, not in the golden armor of conquest, but as a towering presence of pure thought and power. "Joseph Dredd," he said, "you have judged my empire. Now I shall judge you." Dredd's voice was steady. "Then let's hear your verdict." For a long moment, the Emperor said nothing. Then, in a tone heavy with millennia of burden, he spoke. "You have shown humanity what it means to stand for law without faith. You have reminded them that justice is not divine, but human. For that, you have done what even my angels could not." Dredd rose slowly. "Then what's my sentence?" The Emperor's expression softened. "To remain eternal, as law unbent, even when the stars fade." And with a gesture, Dredd's body was consumed by golden light. When it cleared, he stood transformed, a being of living steel and soul fire, his visor glowing like a second sun. He was no longer merely Judge Dredd. He was Lex Eternum, the eternal law. From that day forward, his image was carved beside the Emperor's in the halls of terror. Not as a god, not as a saint, but as a reminder that even in a galaxy of chaos and faith, one truth endures. Without justice, there can be no peace. The age of law had begun,